Hey listeners, it's Mallory Wilsey, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. And I want to take just a moment to tell you about another show on Enrollify that I know you'll love. The Hidden Gem is a new show hosted by Maya Demishkovich, CMO at Carroll Community College. This podcast is dedicated to empowering community college presidents, leaders, and marketing and communication professionals with the knowledge and insights that you need to harness the full potential of strategic marketing and communications within your institution. New episodes drop every other Monday, and you can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search for The Hidden Gem wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I'm excited for our conversation today. Another close examination of kind of the inner details and workings of the digital transformation waves that are affecting universities that they have to kind of grapple with and interface with, how they sort of push through those and find themselves in a position of sort of sustainability and set up for success and serving students and achieving graduation goals and retention goals and all that good stuff, all the things that they want to achieve. How do they do that in this new kind of digitally transformed era for higher education? So our guest today has a great book out about this topic, and we'll get more into that in a moment. But we'll start out as we always do. Michael, if you want to introduce yourself and your professional background and how you got to be where you are today.
Dustin, first of all, thanks for having me on the program. I really appreciate it. Started as an electrical engineer, undergrad, and worked for the phone company, and really got interested in this interface between technology and business. So how do new technologies affect how businesses work? Got my PhD at MIT Sloan School studying that in the context of online markets, and then got really interested in how technology was changing the entertainment industry. So my colleague and I spent about 10 years studying how were new technologies changing the entertainment industry. About right around the pandemic, I started to hear my friends and colleagues in higher education say things that sounded remarkably similar to what the entertainment industry was saying in 2015, right before Amazon, Netflix, and Google really started to take hold. Things like, you know what, the same companies have always dominated my industry. That's not going to change. And then in higher education saying, hey, you know what, the same top universities have always dominated my industry. That's not going to change. And it really started, got me wondering whether there was a similar, disconnect happening between, this is the way the business has always worked. I'll grant you that. But I wonder whether technology might change that. And so I started writing a book about that disruption. And honestly, about halfway through writing the book, I realized that the real story here isn't technological disruption. I think the real story here is social justice. Why on earth are we in higher education hanging on to a status quo that we know does not produce the societal outcomes that we want it to produce? If we think our goal is to help rich kids get a leg up in the job market, we're doing great. But that's not our goal. Can we solve it from within the existing system? I don't think so. Can technology help us solve it? I think there are plenty of opportunities. I'd love for us to get beyond that. We need to preserve the status quo to starting to think about, can we do better and how could technology play into that?
So many people, I guess, talk a big game with that, but I think starting to get into how do we do that? And then even like that idea of what you said of like, why is it so important? Like, because it could be just that idea of like, you know, cool, bright, new, shiny thing, new, digital tools, and they can do kind of amazing things. But then, like you said, just, there's been so much conversation, I feel like, over the past several years around access and all that. And I feel like, you know, there's been a lot of work there. And I think now there's kind of like two different things of one, it's like, okay, well, then what do we do for the students who are who had gotten access that may not have in the past, but then like trying to, I guess, like not lose that thread and keep it going, I think fueled by sort of the earnest desire of like, well, if you work in education, don't you want as many people to get a high quality education as possible? How do we do that? Okay, let's try to have a sustainably scaled, version of higher education and all that. And I guess also just interesting to hear that I guess you were sort of uniquely suited to recognize, this moment of change, the sort of the quiet before the storm of sort of like, I guess what I was hearing is sort of like a complacency, like a, accepting of that status quo. And that's sort of the perfect timing for just just being ripe for disruption. And then certainly, uh, as with so many things, like just accelerated by the pandemic. So I think it's such a like a good time to really be kind of taking a hard look at this and understanding kind of the what, but also like the why. Like why is this so important? So um, we will take the conversation there. The book, The Abundant University, kind of teed it up of like, sort of recognize the moment kind of took it up, took that mantle of saying like, well, I want to write about this, I want to talk about it. And so I guess like kind of, I guess like the journey of writing the book and just what it's all about.
The book is about, like I said, it pivoted towards this idea of social justice. And the book's main points are, I think what we're doing in higher education today is financially unsustainable. And I'm going to argue it's morally unsustainable. And I'd be happy to, flesh that out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the second thing is, I think the problems are systemic, which means we're not going to solve them from within the existing system, and be more than happy to expand on that. The third point is, I think technology gives us an opportunity to create something new, a new system. Um, and the last point of the book is, I think we in higher education can get excited about that if we rediscover our mission, right? So the argument I'm trying to make is kind of like the entertainment industry. I think the entertainment industry initially opposed technological change because they rightly saw it as a threat to their business model, their way of doing business. And I think at some point they realized, you know what? My model is selling shiny plastic discs for 15 bucks a pop. But that's not my mission. My mission is creating great entertainment and getting that entertainment in front of an audience. And if technology can help me fulfill my mission, I want that, even if it means blowing up my model. I would love for us in higher education to get beyond this, let's protect the model, to starting to get excited about what's our mission, and can technology help us do a better job of fulfilling that mission?
Yeah, that idea of like the resistance, like, sort of the inertia, and sort of examining like, well, why is there always so much resistance? It's just like, there's just a lack of foresight or vision and sort of a reimagining of the mission, rediscovering it, or sort of, finding that inspiration again. And I think with the points that you made, like, I guess it's interesting because like the financial piece, the financial sustainability piece is, I think it's what's really grabbing the headlines right now. Because I mean, it's easily quantified. You can say like, look how many colleges are closing, or they've got to cut all these programs, or they got to do all these things. So it's like clearly that shows like where we are now is not working out. It's not going to be, what's going to bring us into the future, in a sort of positive and sustainable way. So I definitely want to focus on some of the other point of like definitely the like it is not morally sustainable, to continue to operate in the way that is, I would say the hallmarks of it are just like, very restrictive. There's these like institutions that just like are like resisting growing their classes or different things. Like there's just sort of a, as much as there's been so much work done on access, it's certainly not enough. So I guess that idea of, the moral aspect of, what is compelling universities to need to change. You just talk a little bit more about that.
A lot of this, I think, starts with Raj Chetty's research at Harvard. So Raj Chetty is an economist at Harvard, and he and his colleagues have done some fascinating research on inequities in access to higher education. and the one I focus on in the book, because the second piece hadn't come out by the time when the book was published, but the first piece showed, using this really creative combination of higher education data and census data, that if you're a kid born into the top 1% of income, you've got a 1 in 4 chance of getting admitted to a highly selective school. If you're a kid born in the bottom 20% of income, you've got a 1 in 300 chance of gaining admission to the same school. And what I say in the book is, hey, I'm an economist. I believe in the efficient allocation of scarce resources. If we in higher education genuinely believe that rich kids just happen to be 77 times more likely to be capable of an elite education than low-income kids, we're doing just fine. But nobody believes that, right? And if you don't believe that, and like I say, I don't know anyone who does, then this is a terrible way of allocating access to the scarce resource of higher education. And we frankly ought to be ashamed of ourselves. Can we change that? And then, I play around with the incentives of a college president. And I don't mean to pick on college presidents, but if you were to, the example I use is Georgia State University. Georgia State University was very intentional about trying to increase equity in access to its campus. And by many measures, it did an incredibly good job. I think they ended up with more Pell eligible students than the entire Ivy League combined, right? What's the problem? The problem is, by doing that, they fell, I think, 30 places in the US News and World Report rankings because their alumni giving wasn't as good, their SAT scores weren't as good, blah, blah, blah. That's a real problem. If your incentives are saying keep admitting the rich kids, then I think that's what we're going to continue to get, even though we know that there are a lot of low-income kids who are deserving. They're just never gonna find access to our campus under the existing model.
I don't think anybody would say that, yeah, this sort of like finishing society for, the elites or whatever is what higher education should be, especially nowadays. Because I think we also have like a lot of good evidence of just sort of like society benefits when we are more educated, and like whatever shape that takes. Like it doesn't have to be like, everybody's becoming mechanical engineers or whatever, like getting the most highly paid jobs or whatever. It's just like you have this experience of sort of, like very self-directed learning. Like you're choosing to go, you're choosing what you want to study. You just become a more sort of holistically, uh, positively contributing citizen, whatever, like all those sort of things. So it's like, okay, there's that. And then there's certainly, trying to move kind of our workforce in the areas that they need to go to. Like, college is part of the equation. It's not the only mechanism that we have to do that. But it's just that idea of like, yeah, we're just letting kind of, these jobs stay open that could be filled, that are gainfully employing and are what we need. And then like there's these people that just can't, you know, get out of poverty or whatever. It's like kind of this idea is like we're just sort of like, yeah, like accepting the status quo that is sort of, yeah, it's morally, unsustainable to keep that going. And we have the ability to expand access, bring higher quality education to more people. And even just the idea that like, how can I put this to you, I guess, because it might be just part of the equation of like kind of addressing this sort of moral imperative around, uh, these institutions needing to change is that like, you know, there's just more normalcy around like all the different options, I guess. Cause I think like when I was growing up, it's kind of like it's a 4-year degree or bust. But now there's just like a lot more openness around like, well, you could do a boot camp and now they're making pathways. If you do the boot camp, you can go get a degree. You could go, do all these different things that can kind of like just create these on ramps and get people moving. Cause it's even like, okay, you do this, you get a great job that then maybe pays for your further education. And I know that's just been what I've been talking with a lot of different people, the different perspectives on for the podcast and everything. So I guess just your perspective on that idea that like it's going to kind of like take a lot of kind of moving pieces and different organizations, different actors to kind of address this moral imperative. Like the idea that like this 4-year institution that's 300 years old is going to change in any timely fashion to be what we think it should be, what it needs to be. Do you see sort of that like kind of complexity and diversity of different post-secondary options sort of helping to address this kind of moral issue?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. One of the key points I make in the book is this question of why haven't we changed, right? Why hasn't higher education changed? And it's, I think, particularly salient given that a lot of really smart people, including Clay Christensen, the father of disruptive change, predicted in the early 2010s that technology would radically disrupt the university. He has a quote in, I think, 2013 that says, within 5 years, universities are going to be in real financial trouble. We're 10 years out. Clearly, that hasn't happened. So the question is why? And what I try to argue in the book is Clay Christensen's theory of disruption is absolutely brilliant. It just doesn't explain everything. So I think it works really well in some context. I'm not sure it works all that well in the context of higher education. Again, not to over rely on the entertainment industry, but one of the things we saw in the entertainment industry in 2014, I believe it was, we had a senior executive from the entertainment industry, president of home entertainment at one of the big six studios, come and talk to our class and about technological change. And my colleague Rahul asked him, are you at all worried about the threat that Netflix and Amazon and Google might pose to your business? And he said, you know what? My business is different. The same six studios have dominated my business for the last 100 years. There's a reason for that. That's not going to change. And so we tried to break down is, why is that? Why is it that a small number of really powerful studios have dominated your business? And the answer we came up with was, well, those studios controlled three key scarce resources. They controlled access to the scarce financial and technical tools you need to make content. They controlled access to the scarce channels you need to distribute content. And they were able to use copyright law to create a scarcity in how people got access to content. And none of the technological shifts they'd faced changed those scarcities. And in the mid 2010s, they were facing a series of simultaneous technological shifts that were making it easier to make content, easier to distribute content, and easier to consume content. That's what changed the business. What the heck does that have to do with education? I would argue that power in higher education comes from being able to control a similar set of scarce resources. Scarcity and access to the classroom, who gets admitted, scarcity and access to the faculty experts, who do you learn from, and scarcity and access to the really valuable credential that's going to move you in the job market. And if you think about it that way, MOOCs and the other ed tech things we saw in the early 2010s, they created abundance in access to the classroom and access to the faculty, but they didn't really change the credential. That's the piece that I think we as a society really need to figure out is now there are a whole bunch of new ways you can get smart about a whole bunch of different topics. You just can't signal it to an employer unless you pay a big university $250,000. I think we can do better.
Hey, it's Dustin here. Exciting news. I'll be at the Engage Summit in Raleigh, North Carolina on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Hosted by Element 451, the Engage Summit is your roadmap for AI readiness in higher education. Sessions will focus on cutting-edge AI applications that are reshaping student outreach, enhancing staff productivity, and offering deep insights into ROI. This isn't your typical conference. It's a strategic summit where you'll learn from the best about leveraging AI and digital strategies in higher ed marketing. Imagine 2 days filled with hands-on sessions, real success stories, and the chance to network with top minds in the field. You'll leave with practical, transformative takeaways as you learn how AI fosters a more personalized, efficient approach from recruitment to student success. Oh, and the best part? The Engage Summit is incredibly affordable. Use the discount code Enrollify50 and you can register for just $99. So join me and many of my fellow Enrollify Network creators at the Engage Summit this June. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. Can't wait to see you there. Yeah. And that's something I remember, from kind of like my early days in ed tech and working in different places and is that idea of oh yeah, like that last part, like the credential, like that's the idea of like what, if nothing else, the university basically kind of has that like monopoly on and everything. And I think that's, I guess, to my point, as a very succinct way to put it, is like, I think we're starting to see like faint cracks in that, the idea that you could get something else that maybe obviously is not a 4-year bachelor's degree credential that carries a lot of weight, and everybody kind of, has sort of an understanding of the value of that, in the job market and stuff. But like, if there's other things that people can do and get gainfully employing careers and stuff like that, and but that's so much just like an A to B sort of like transaction or something. It's like, well, yeah, we work with this boot camp. We know what they teach and we know what they do. You graduate that, you're on the fast track to get in here, get a job here. So it's like there's definitely still a lot of sort of room that needs to, sort of a gap that needs to be closed and everything. But I think even just like acknowledgement that some of the institutions are working with, these sort of disruptors, these digital organizations that are providing some credential of some sort, and just that there's a lot of movement on sort of like micro credentials and all that. It just seems like to me it's just like kind of funny to say. I'm just like, there needs to be just like the one platform that curates all the micro credentials and skills and badges. But I'm like, is that good? Is that healthy? I don't know. But it's just an idea that like I think we're seeing that like as this year has begun, and I've talked to some people where it's like we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, like with different things, that there's just not a good way or good consistent way to translate all those things that could sort of, be this kind of ascendant alternative to the traditional credential and stuff. But I think we are seeing, I know there's graphs that are coming out recently that like people are getting more micro credentials, and it's closing in on like bachelor's degrees and stuff. Like it's the second most, earned credential or something, I think, in the these surveys and stuff. You're speaking a lot, I think from, your kind of lens and your point of view as a faculty member in terms of just like, access to the classroom, access to the faculty and all that, and earning the credential and stuff. So to move towards kind of the optimistic sort of point of view here, like what are the opportunities that you're seeing? Any specific things around like sort of this digital transformation, things that could, provide more access, provide more opportunities to more people? Um, any opportunities, I guess, that you're seeing from your point of view, kind of in the teaching world?
Yeah, I'll give two examples that I think are fun. One is there's a company called outlier.org, and I know about them because if you pass an outlier class, you get credit at the University of Pittsburgh, so right down the street. My daughter was president of the STEMinist Club in her high school. So take feminism and combine it with STEM, and you've got STEMinism. And her high school, and I won't name them because I don't want to disparage them, but when she was heading into her senior year, she wanted to take AP Physics. And they said, you know what? You can't take AP Physics because you don't have AP Calculus, and you can't take AP Calculus because you don't have pre-calculus, and you can't take pre-calculus because we're not offering it this summer. I'm sorry. That didn't sit well with me and my wife. And so we, basically went back and said, hey, if she passes this outlier calculus class that gives her credit at the University of Pittsburgh, are you really saying she's not ready for high school calculus? Anyway, we won that argument. Outliers calculus is really interesting in the sense that it's taught by three very different professors. Tim Chartier, Davidson University, white guy like me, John Urschel, who finished his PhD in math at MIT. And by the way, before he started his math PhD at MIT, was the starting guard for the Baltimore Ravens. So a pretty special guy. And then Hannah Fry, University College London. And the way they teach it is they each teach their own. They teach the same topic, but they teach it in their own voice. And you as a student can mix and match and pick and choose who you take it from. My daughter immediately gravitated towards, guess what? Hannah Fry. And I was mentioning this to a colleague, and my colleague said, oh, Mike, there's plenty of research out there showing that in general, in quant classes, men do better than women. And that difference goes away when the class is taught by a woman. And guess what? The same thing is true of underrepresented minorities. In general, lower performance, and that difference goes away when the person standing up in front of the class is someone you can identify with. It's really hard to respond to it in a traditional classroom. Outliers created something that you can actually respond to it quite easily and quite effectively. That's a pretty cool adaptation.
And that ability for like, you opt in to what you feel like is going to be most helpful. And even just that idea that like, I'm sure some people are just because of like, just the systemic issues, they're just gonna be like, oh, I need to get, this AP physics course from a man or something. But then just that idea that it could be this sort of awakening, like subconsciously or something, that idea that it's just going to be like, yeah, I'm just gravitating towards this person. They seem to be like, because even on its face, they're probably choosing it. It really is just kind of on literal face value of like, oh, I'll get this woman to teach me that. Like, she seems nice or something. I don't know. Like, but then it's like, you can kind of like gravitate and kind of have this choice, or, kind of choose your own adventure and everything. But so, yeah, I love that. It was a very awesome example. And even kind of embedded in that, I feel like is a really good example is the idea that we can create more opportunities for just like students to earn college credit just like more efficiently. Like if they're in a good place, like in high school, because we've seen even that has gotten a lot of attention, grabbed a lot of headlines. Is that like sort of a buoy in turbulent waters for community colleges has been like, dual credit programs and things and working with their local high schools and those sort of things. So I think that idea that like you could, because that again, that's just the idea of like, oh, well, what does that community college offer? Like, and there's going to be some limitations there. The idea that we can, through sort of this digital transformation, different offerings that are out there, be like, hey, we've got a whole suite of options here. Outlier, yeah, it's a really good example. You choose what you want to do, when you want to do it, who you want to take it from, and they could be in a good place where it's like, yeah, I can end up getting my bachelor's in 3 years, and that's where I think, so
Right.
again, a lot of people are like, maybe it should be 3 years. Like, does it need to be four? I don't know. And I think it's if in the meantime, until we figure out how many years a bachelor's degree should be, like people can, again, choose their own adventure, I guess, for that sort of turn of phrase of like, how many courses and what courses they might want to take to kind of get a leg up, uh, ahead of potentially going to college or set themselves up to be potentially a more competitive candidate for their college of choice.
And I think a lot of that has to do with creating a feedback loop where the student can give me input into what classes they need and how they need to receive those classes. The example I think of that I also talk about in the book is I gave this talk at, let's just say, a top business school. And one of the faculty after the talk said, we at this business school have a really successful executive education program. We bring executives from all across the world to our campus for a 7-week residential experience. And we've always thought it needs to be residential because you got to have that rubbing of elbows, blah, blah, blah. And the only problem with the program is we're not getting female executives in anywhere near the number we know they exist in the marketplace. During COVID, we took that program online, and guess what? Female executives showed up in the proportions you'd expect them to show up. And you stare at that for a second, and through a set of processes that my daughter would rightly describe as the patriarchy, what you realize is that male executives can take a couple months away from their families much more easily than female executives can. That's totally unfair, but that's the reality. What this particular school said was the increase in diversity, the increase in access was so valuable that we've decided to take this thing that we used to think had to be done residentially, and now we're going to deliver it online. That's pretty cool, and I would love for us in higher education to think about the idea that, yeah, you've got to come, you've got to be a good test taker. You have to have found your stride in high school. You have to come straight out of high school. You have to go to a residential program. And oh, by the way, your parents have to have $250,000 sitting around. Excludes a lot of deserving people who we could give access to if we were to change that model.
It kind of is that idea, like what you're doing is like, well, let's get down to the details, like a specific example. Okay, an MBA program, like, and all that is like, what was the change? Okay, well, they're changing the modality. And then that's like, I think a lot of the story of the past decade is that like, institutions are maybe working with OPMs or doing it themselves or whatever, is the idea of like, wait, we've got a great MBA program. We'd love to offer it online. Like you're building off something that's established, creating a new modality and, maybe it's a new revenue stream or whatever. But like, I have to imagine that like half or more of those institutional leaders were just doing it because of a revenue stream and not doing it inspired by the moral imperative of like increasing greater gender and ethnic diversity and stuff in their MBA candidates and stuff like that. But it's like a happy byproduct or a happy accident. And then that's even the idea that like they may not be doing as right by those students or getting as many of them as they could or should because they're not even like intentionally building this out to be a more equitable sort of access point to that particular credential and stuff. But the idea of like understanding now like the examples and a clear sort of like almost like case study of like, okay, like this is what we're struggling with, this is a way that really worked well to address that problem, do with it what you will, and be like, okay, we're doing this because we want to make sure that we have diverse MBA classes. Let's make sure we do that the right way. Like, do this very knowingly and intentionally and thoughtfully and everything. And it's probably going to happen quicker. It's going to happen better and all that. So I think it's just like a great, yeah, just a great anecdote and a great example to get more, like, just to drill down with this a little bit more. I think because I think for better or worse, so many of the conversations are just sort of like about sort of like higher ed writ large, or like greater access to the institution, like holistically or whatever, which is great. But then like you do kind of have to recognize maybe those like friction points and hurdles on like a, maybe a per school basis or a per program basis, because it could be like, I mean, we're making strides over here, we're actually doing worse over here, like, and that's kind of like kind of just throw over average, like we're earnestly trying to do better as an institution, but not maybe fully aware of kind of those details of like particular, like the ways a particular like program or something is structured, that's really kind of having us get in our own way.
Riffing off that a little bit, another of the examples I talk about in the book is Arizona State University and how you teach organic chemistry online. And you think about that for a second, you go, you can't teach organic chemistry online. What are you doing? Are you sending, you're mailing hydrochloric acid to the student's home and hoping they have the proper ventilation to do it? And so I interviewed Ara Austin, who's one of the professors who teaches organic chemistry online. And what she said is, we looked at our curriculum, and what we realized is 13 of these 14 weeks work perfectly well online. The real thing you need to do in person is the labs. And so what we did is we delivered the stuff that works well online, and then we bring the online students to our campus for a 1-week intensive organic chemistry lab experience where you do 2 labs a day, all day for six days, from Monday through Saturday. And what they discovered, surveying the students and looking at grades, is that the online students' knowledge of the OChem lab was equivalent to the residential students, but the online students actually had a higher identity as scientists. That, coming out of this back-to-back 6 days of labs, I walk out of that and say, I'm a scientist. I can do this in a different way than if you did those same labs, 1 lab a week over the course of a 12-week semester. And the point here is just to say, I'm not saying it's 100% online. I'm just saying I think we need to think more creatively about how can we design a program that acknowledges the technologies we have available to us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in this sort of hybrid frontier, I think, as we're all sort of reckoning that, like, okay, so maybe is it like the best of both worlds? Like, is that what we should be doing? 'Cause I think, yeah, it was such a like polarity of sort of like sides of this sort of, kind of dilemma in this discussion and everything, is that it's like, oh, is it completely online or is it completely in person? Like, pick one. It's, you gotta flip the switch on or off or something. But it's like, yeah, that idea that like, one, for access purposes, and certain times like two, it's just easier, better, or just as good to teach, a lot of the concepts and, theories and different things like online, and you can, track, okay, people are spending more time or less time on this. And, there's just like a lot of like great aspects of digital tools in terms of just the delivery of education that you can use to sort of, keep sort of a, continuous improvement going. And then, yeah, like you said, it's like, okay, well, this really can only be done in person, then let's do that in person. Or like, I know for certain online programs that I've worked and supported, like they built in that like students had to do at least 2 immersions, like an intensive weekend together. And those are students' favorite parts of the program, but it was kind of, like a burden of like, well, I got to travel to different places and do whatever. But like thinking creatively about how you can leverage like, certainly a lot of the established like on-campus resources that you might have, and supplement them and maybe amplify them through really kind of thoughtfully designed, digital education offerings, your institution. But, we're looking at sort of the opportunities and everything. And certainly, you're speaking to kind of like that other kind of core part of like getting reinvigorated by the mission of the university and everything. So I guess like I'm honestly gonna get your take of like how you stay inspired for higher education. We're going through a very tumultuous time here. What keeps you inspired about the future of higher ed?
What we're doing is so incredibly important to individual students, and I think it's so incredibly important to society that I think we're going to come around to the recognition that these new technologies aren't our enemy. They're actually a great enabling force behind what we all want to do. A quote I didn't include in the book, but now kind of wish I should have, is a quote from a colleague who, as I was talking about this, she said something to the effect of, "We in higher education train our students to identify and dismantle unjust social structures in every aspect of society except our backyard, except higher education itself. I would love for us to take that same energy and say, friends, could we do a better job of allowing students who otherwise would be shut out of the process to get access to the process?
Yeah, I mean, I my whole professional career is in higher education. I think, yeah, it's like there's so much that is inspiring and motivating about like the impact that it can have on people's lives and the capabilities and stuff that we have. Like, yeah, like don't kick and scream and fear, these different tools and stuff. If you do them in a thoughtful way and, be considerate and sort of open minded, like you could do it in a way that like fits your institutional culture and then there's just so many kind of upsides, I think, when you kind of get on the other side of it. And a question that we didn't really get to, but around just like, all the things that we mentioned, but also around like collaboration for the faculty and staff that they can kind of work better together and not be so siloed and those sort of things where like I think that example I was saying where like maybe like the MBA program, they do that modality kind of shift and found these really great results. Like they could even just help their own like sort of peers at the same institution to do better, on those sort of fronts and everything, and have platforms and spaces to communicate with each other and share those best practices and things and kind of show their work. So um yeah, I think there's so much uh opportunity here. And I love the name of the book. 'Cause I think it like kind of embodies like the abundant university, like the idea that we can get to a place where this is sort of, scalable and sustainable and accessible and just really impactful, heading into the future, bringing these institutions into kind of this digital future and everything. So always like to end on kind of final thoughts, calls to action, things to kind of wrap up and summarize this episode. The floor is yours.
Let me riff on two things. One, you brought up this idea of collaboration. One of the things, like I said, I talk about in the book is the notion, this weird disconnect between you get tenure in the university by becoming the world's recognized expert in this incredibly narrow area of your field, right? So my value to the university is I'm a specialist, except in the classroom, I teach like a generalist, right? I teach
Mhm.
this person's topic and this person's topic and this. Wouldn't it be cool if we could create a system where the experts come in and give their expertise, and I'm sort of more like a conductor, making sure everybody's talking to the same narrative. Um, we've never been able to do that before. What I think Zoom taught us is we can do that with these technologies. Like to me, one of the really amazing things about Zoom is it became much easier to get guest lectures when I said, you don't have to fly
Mhm.
to Pittsburgh, but if you've got 80 minutes, you're the world's recognized expert in this area. Do you have 80 minutes next Tuesday to talk to my students? And a heck of a lot of people said, yeah. So that's one. Getting back to the moral problem we have, you mentioned how we need to rethink the credential, um, and one of the things I've heard is I've sort of pressed that notion back, particularly from economists, is you know no, we can't, we shouldn't change the university because what we know is a university degree provides a great ROI to its students. If you want to become wealthy later in life, you need to have a 4-year university degree. And my pushback to that is what you're saying is the key to becoming wealthy later in life is getting a 4-year university degree. What I'm telling you is the key to getting a 4-year university degree is being wealthy. And when you put those two things together, we've created a terrible feedback loop that perpetuates wealth. We in higher education, if we care half as much about social justice as we say we do, we should desperately want to change the system. That's what I would love for my colleagues to get excited about.
Yeah, like the idea of like having a great sort of digital ecosystem and tech stack and stuff can like, hopefully like tamp down cost and like keep those maybe more in control and just sort of kind of change the whole equation of like, well, we have to keep raising tuition because we have, whatever else. And yeah, there's so many dynamics around just like, yeah, hopefully the the incentives or the motivation for institutional leaders can kind of just be reimagined through, the moment that we're going through. And yeah, like the work of folks like yourself to just like closely examine it and kind of advocate for these changes and give really good examples and all of that, I think is just a big way that we get there. So I appreciate you for hanging out for the podcast here. We'll have ways to connect with you and check out the book in the description for the episode as usual. But yeah, just thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did.
Dustin, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the program.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.